Have you ever met someone like this? Someone who is always gentle, polite, never raises their voice, and never shows anger. It could be a colleague, a neighbor, a teacher, or perhaps it is you. They never say anything wrong. They never hurt anyone. They even help others quietly without recognition. But for some reason, after being around them, you feel cold, an unnamed sensation, a subtle unease that lingers far too long. Why is that? Why are there people so kind that they make us let our guard down? Carl Jung once said, "We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Perhaps within that perfect kindness, a part of the human self is being hidden, a powerful part that is being repressed, a part that, if not acknowledged, can still cause harm invisibly. Today, I want to take you on a journey, not to judge, not to fear, but to understand that within each of us there is a shadow. And what makes it most dangerous is not its existence, but our refusal to look at it. In the next 20 minutes, we will explore why the kindest people are sometimes the ones who hurt others the most, what the shadow is and where it comes from, how to recognize it in daily life, especially if you are someone who always lives for others, and how to turn the shadow into an ally instead of letting it quietly shape your fate. If you are someone who always tries to be kind, always wants to do the right thing, and still feels exhausted without knowing why, this video is for you. Not to change who you are, but to help you return to the forgotten part of yourself. There is a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from work, not from family, and not from age. It comes from always having to be a good person, a reasonable person, a person who always yields, and no one sees that you're running on empty. Have you ever felt that way? Saying, "I'm fine," while something inside you tightens, smiling, but feeling a little more distant from yourself each day. We weren't born wearing masks. Children don't know how to pretend. They cry when they're hurt, get angry when they're denied, run to the ones they love without fear of being judged. But slowly, we learn that some emotions are inappropriate, like anger, like selfishness, like envy, like wanting time for ourselves. And if you are a woman, that lesson often comes earlier and cuts deeper. You're taught to be gentle, to endure, to put others first. You're taught how to be a good wife, a capable mother, a complete woman. But no one teaches you how to sit with your own fragile self. Carl Jung once said that every person wears a social mask. He called it the persona. It is the part we construct to be loved, to be accepted, to belong. There's nothing wrong with wearing a mask. In a world full of expectations, sometimes it's how we survive. But the danger lies in forgetting that it's only a part of us, not the whole of who we are. There are women who live their whole lives doing what they should, and then one day, they feel empty, even though no one did anything wrong. A part of them, the raw, authentic part, has been neglected for so long that when it tries to return, it comes back as anxiety, as sleepless nights, as sudden bursts of unexplained anger, or as a quiet sadness that no one around them can seem to understand. You might ask, how do I know if I'm wearing a mask? The answer isn't in your actions. It's in how you feel afterward. If you feel hollow, feel like you're performing in your own family, feel unseen, then maybe it's time to ask yourself, who is living this life in your place? The hardest part isn't taking off the mask. It's facing the one behind it, the one who might be tired, might be wounded, might not have been loved in an honest way for a very long time. But that person is you. That is the part of you that you need to return to and hold with all the gentleness you've always given to others. Because the mask may help you survive, but only truth can help you live. When you reject a part of yourself, it doesn't disappear. It simply retreats inward and stays there, silent, but never absent. Carl Jung called it the shadow, not evil, not sinful, but all the parts of us we once were, but were no longer allowed to be. Try to remember, when did you start putting parts of yourself away? Perhaps it was the moment you were laughed at for crying too much, or when you were called selfish for wanting to do something just for yourself, or simply when you were praised for being good because you knew how to endure. Those words didn't wound you right away, but they planted a command, that to be loved. You must deny yourself, and you obeyed, not because you were weak, but because you needed to belong. And so it began. With every piece of advice, every disapproving glance, every silent judgment, you learned how to fold the truest parts of yourself inward, like stuffing pieces of your soul into a box, then burying it at the bottom of your consciousness. No one saw, no one knew, and sometimes even you forgot. But the shadow never sleeps. It moves quietly, seeping into your relationships, into moments of unexplained frustration, into times you feel irritated by others, when, deep down, you're seeing a reflection of the part you once abandoned. You were once called too sensitive, so you rejected your softness. You were once blamed for wanting too much, so you tried to need nothing from anyone. But when you see someone living in the truth, you gave up. You feel uncomfortable, not because they're wrong, but because they unintentionally remind you of the part you left behind. The shadow is born from contradiction between who we truly are and who we think we must become. It doesn't form in a single moment, but accumulates, bit by bit, from seemingly trivial things that are powerful enough to split a child's soul in two. And the truth is, the shadow doesn't just carry what you dislike about yourself. It also carries your potential, your hidden desires, your silenced creativity, your once blazing faith, drowned by fear. You didn't only reject the wounds, you also rejected the light that once lived inside you. The shadow is proof that there was once a part of you so alive, but you sacrificed it to survive in a world full of demands. No one blames you for that. It was how you endured, how you held on to the scraps of love you thought you could get. But now that you've grown, now that you've overcome so much, perhaps it's time to return and open that old box, not to blame yourself, but to call back each part of your soul that was forgotten, because you deserve to live a life that is whole. There is a strange paradox. The shadow is what we reject, and yet it is the very thing silently guiding our lives. Not loud, not forceful, not knocking at the door. It simply shows up in every decision, every reaction, every wound we can't quite name. Have you ever asked yourself, why do I always choose the wrong person in love? Why do I have to force myself to hold on to a relationship, even when deep down I've felt the cracks for so long? Have you ever been startled to realize you stayed silent in conversations where you should have spoken up, or found yourself crying after someone casually brought up something you thought you had already forgotten? That's not weakness. That's a sign. Your shadow is speaking in its own way, because the shadow doesn't speak in words. It speaks in feelings. It hides in those moments you feel suffocated in a crowd, in the emptiness that follows a day where no one truly saw you. Carl Jung once said, "What is not brought to consciousness will continue to operate in the dark, and we will call it fate." We do not live by freedom. We live by what has not yet been healed. The shadow is not just where pain is stored. It is a living archive, holding everything we once tried to forget. And it will find ways to be seen through tangled dreams, through repeated behaviors, or through sudden emotional outbursts that seem to come out of nowhere. Many people ask, "I'm always kind, always enduring, always careful not to hurt others. So why do I still feel so empty, disappointed, and lost?" Because they've lived too long as the version of themselves they thought they should be, to the point where they can no longer hear the voice of the shadow. And so the shadow begins to scream through constant exhaustion, through emotional numbness in relationships, through silence so prolonged it turns into resentment. The shadow is not the enemy. It is simply the part of the soul that has not yet been heard. When you feel yourself sabotaging your own happiness, when you lash out at someone who didn't deserve it, when you overreact to a small comment, pause and ask yourself, what part of me is being abandoned? The beautiful truth is, the shadow doesn't ask you to become someone else. It only wants you to return, to look it in the eye, and say, "I see you now. I hear you, and I will not abandon you again." Because a woman is truly strong, not when she has no fear, but when she dares to walk into her own darkness and bring back the light. One of the deepest illusions a human being can carry throughout life is the belief that I am a good person. I never hurt anyone. I am always right, always kind, always considerate. It sounds beautiful and true and admirable, but there's something you need to know, that those who believe they are entirely good are often the very ones who cannot see their own shadow. Carl Jung once warned, "The most dangerous person is not the one who gets angry, not the one who argues often, but the one who believes there is no darkness within them." Because when you think, "I could never do anything wrong," you will justify every action in the name of helping, of protecting, of being right. You've seen the mother who controls every decision her child makes in the name of love. You've seen the friend who constantly criticizes in the name of caring. You've seen the wife who endures everything in the name of sacrifice. And you have been one of them too. Not wrong, not bad, just unaware that sometimes goodness is a thin shell, hiding a deep fear of being unloved, a quiet desperation to never be abandoned. The shadow doesn't just live in people who are cruel. It lives perhaps more clearly in those who try too hard to be good, because to maintain the image of the good person, you've left behind many parts of your natural self. You're afraid to say, "I don't like this," afraid to set boundaries, afraid to show anger in case it ruins how others see you. But when all those emotions get buried, they don't disappear. They leak into your exhaustion, into your words, which sound gentle but cut sharply beneath the surface, into actions you don't understand, even as you do them. You control others and call it protection. You withhold help and justify it by saying they need to grow on their own. You're hurting, but hide your feelings behind the label, I'm fine. We don't need to be perfect. We only need to be honest with ourselves, that there are times we're selfish, times we're angry, times we no longer want to keep sacrificing. And that doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you real, whole, a being of both light and shadow, just like all of us. The shadow doesn't want you to disappear. It only wants to be acknowledged. Because sometimes, the most dangerous form of kindness is not kindness at all, but a mask we wear to avoid the truth. And if today, you begin to ask yourself whether your goodness is hiding a part of you that still needs healing, then that is the first step toward freedom. Have you ever felt that way? The feeling that you are no longer whole, still living, still smiling, still fulfilling every role, but inside, something essential feels missing. A piece you can't quite name. Maybe you feel like you're living inside a familiar body, but your emotions are lost, and your soul seems to be somewhere else. Carl Jung didn't speak of the shadow only as a psychological phenomenon. He saw it as a sign of inner division, the fragmentation of the soul. Each time you say, I'm fine, when you're clearly in pain, a part of your soul detaches. Each time you stay silent instead of expressing what you need, another piece slips away. Each time you smile with emptiness inside, there's an invisible cut, light as silk, but one that leaves you less whole than before. We don't just lose touch with our emotions. We gradually lose connection to ourselves, and the danger is we get used to it. We get used to living without our soul fully present in our body, used to the emptiness, as if it's just part of life. Women who live for others are rarely taught how to live for themselves. They know how to be mothers, wives, daughters, colleagues, but sometimes, for their whole lives, they've never been taught how to be themselves. No one showed them how. And by the time they want to return, they can no longer remember who they once were. Soul fragmentation isn't loud. It happens in silence, like when you stop singing a song you once loved. Stop drawing, even though you once dreamed of being an artist. Stop writing in your journal because you're too busy for something so useless. You don't realize that each of those choices is your soul quietly closing a door, bit by bit, little by little. But the most beautiful truth is those pieces never disappear. They haven't left you. They're simply waiting in a deep corner of your subconscious, waiting for you to be still enough, loving enough, brave enough to return. You don't need to go back to who you were at the beginning. You just need to gently knock on the door within and say, I've been listening. I see you. I'm ready to bring you home. No complex technique is required. You don't have to be an expert in psychology. You only need to begin with a small act, a moment just for yourself, a feeling allowed to exist, a dream written down again, a boundary set, not from selfishness, but from the desire to be whole. True healing doesn't come from banishing the shadow. It comes from gradually gathering each piece of your soul, so that one day you can stand in the middle of your life and finally feel, I have come home. We often think of the shadow as something personal, a private matter between me and the parts of myself I've rejected. But Carl Jung went further than that. He said, the shadow is not only a personal psychological phenomenon, it is also a collective force, a layer of the unconscious shared by the entire community. It doesn't just live inside you. It lives within the culture you breathe every day. Society also wears a mask. It has things it praises as good and things it quietly pushes into the forbidden zone. We are taught to be productive, to always be cheerful, to be agreeable, to sacrifice, to love ourselves but not be selfish, to be strong but not rebellious, to heal but not appear weak. Do you see it now? Even on the path of awakening, there is a shadow at work. It shows up when we're expected to be positive at all times, when exhaustion is seen as a spiritual failure, when anger is labeled as negative energy, when women over 50 are looked at with pity, as if their worth fades with time. The shadow of society doesn't just lie in behavior. It lies in belief, in how we judge one another, and in the assumptions we take for granted as normal. And then you start to wonder, is something wrong with me? Why am I not happy? Why do I feel invisible? The truth is, there is nothing wrong. You're simply living in a world where the shadow has been ignored for so long. It became part of the structure. The collective shadow is harder to see because it's in everything. In advertisements, in how we raise children, in a mother's lullaby. In the mirrors women look into and feel like they must fade so others can shine. But just like the personal shadow, the collective shadow doesn't want to destroy. It only wants to be seen, to be brought into the light, to be understood and transformed. You cannot fix the world alone, but you can be the first to pause, to ask questions, and to stop passing on a value system that you know no longer serves. And that is the most courageous act a woman can offer this world. Not by shouting, not by fighting, but simply by starting with the choice to look at her own shadow and at the shadow of the world around her. We didn't come here to be perfect. We came here to be real. Carl Jung never taught us to eliminate the shadow. He didn't urge us to destroy the dark parts. He invited us to step into them, not with weapons, not with judgment, but with honesty, and a heart strong enough to hold space, because the shadow doesn't disappear when we ignore it. It doesn't dissolve when we blame it. It only softens when we look at it with eyes no longer afraid. The journey of integrating the shadow doesn't begin with intellect. It begins with silence. A space wide enough to feel what has always been there, but never named. It might be a childhood wound, an anger that was never allowed to cry out, a longing to be loved unconditionally, but was labeled as too sensitive, too much, too needy. You don't need to excavate every memory. You don't need to understand every psychological layer. You only need to begin with one simple thing. Listen to yourself without judgment. Write down what you feel, the moments you overreact, the people who irritate you, the patterns that keep repeating in your life. That is where the shadow calls not to destroy you, but to show you that you are not yet truly free. Integrating the shadow doesn't mean letting it take over. It means acknowledging its presence so that from there, you can choose your response consciously. No longer replaying the same old scripts, no longer living in defense, but stepping forward as a more whole being. You may touch your anger, your selfishness, your jealousy, all the things you once felt ashamed of and tried to deny. But when you can say, I have those parts in me too, you don't become a bad person, you become a real one. That is the first step toward compassion, not for others, but for yourself, the one who has lived too long in separation. You don't need to become the light. You only need to be a small lamp, shining into your own darkness, and brave enough to stay there for a while, not running, not rationalizing, just being there and saying, I see you, and I still choose to love you. There is a kind of light that does not dazzle, that does not come from outside, and needs no one's approval. It is gentle, quiet, but when it appears, it melts away every mask, every hardened shell you once wore just to be loved. That light is not born from the things you did right, but from the very places you once believed were weak, where you felt fear, where you felt lost. Carl Jung called it the light that shines from the shadow, from the deepest layers of the unconscious, where you buried not only pain, but also the seeds that never had a chance to grow. You once thought the shadow was something to overcome, but now you realize the shadow is not a prison. It is the gatekeeper. Only when you are brave enough to step inside will you reclaim the parts of your soul that have long been asleep. And then, quietly, you no longer need to become someone else. You no longer need to be perfect. You no longer need to be right all the time. You no longer need to earn love through sacrifice. You simply need to be present with all that you are, with light and with shadow. Then, you begin to understand others more deeply. You no longer rush to judge. You no longer need to appear strong, because you now know every person is fighting their own shadow. And true kindness does not come from a polished gaze, but from eyes that have known tears. Enlightenment is not a dazzling peak. It is the moment you sit in silence, alone, facing the part of yourself you once feared most, and saying, I will not abandon you again. That is the moment you are truly free, not because you have won, but because you have made peace. And if today you do just one small thing, pause and ask yourself, what part of me have I left behind on this journey? When you name it, when you open your arms, when you choose to stay, that is when true light will come, not from above, but from within you, from the deepest, stillest, most beautiful part of your soul. Perhaps you once believed that the healing journey was an upward path toward the light, toward peace, toward something better. But now, you know that to get there, you must go downward, inward, and sometimes even in reverse. Healing doesn't begin when you become better. It begins the moment you sit down in stillness and dare to face the part of yourself you once turned away from. If you still feel afraid, if you still feel lost, if you still feel unready, that's okay. The shadow is not in a rush. The soul is not in a rush. And neither are you. All you need to do is pause, even for a single moment, and say to yourself, I see you. I will not leave you behind. I am learning how to come home. That is enough. And if something in this video has touched you, even just a small part, a single line, a feeling you've never had words for, Hold on to it like a seed. You don't need to do anything right now. Just let it stay with you. Let it rest within you and allow it to grow when you're ready. Because true awakening doesn't begin with a bell. It begins with a pause, a whisper, so soft, from deep within you. Thank you for listening, for walking with me through this journey, and most of all, for choosing to return. Even one step is enough for the light to begin finding its way through the darkness back to you.